I'm genuinely delighted now to be joined by Mordaunt MP, the International Trade Minister. Penny was one of our first guests when we started about a year ago, when we talked about your brilliant book, Greater, the Future Prospects of the United Kingdom, which we'll come to a little bit later on. And I mainly want to talk today about your talks on trade in the United States of America, the Prime Minister's talks on trade in India, and how that can play an important part in the fortunes of your government and the fortunes, more importantly, of people out there listening to our conversation. I have to put couple of things to you first, though, that were in Bethany's news there. Reports in quite a few of the newspapers that 2 cabinet ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers face allegations of sexual misconduct, may be referred for an investigation. As a senior woman in Parliament, does that ring a bell? Bullying and sexism are nothing new, sadly, in the Palace of Westminster.
Well, they're not. I mean, these particular allegations are extremely serious and shocking. But we've seen elsewhere in the press today, there is misogyny out there, as there is in every walk of life. And I'm glad to see that people are calling that out, including the Prime Minister today.
The other thing that's in the papers, which I know you will care passionately about as an internationalist, and that's something that you always have been, that comments upon Priti Patel's Rwanda immigration policy. Priti says that the BBC and members of the opposition have been pretty xenophobic, anti-foreigner in their commentary upon these matters.
Well, look, the policy, we will soon see if it's starting to work. There is some indication already that it may be having a deterrent effect. And that's what is going to matter about this set of policies. When you announce something that's really quite groundbreaking, you are going to get a lot of criticism and a lot of scepticism. But we will see. We will see if this is going to start to work. And no doubt the people traffickers will start to adapt their business model to try and circumvent this, and we'll adapt as well. Yeah,
but not xenophobia. Reasonable criticism of what the policy may or may not achieve.
I think it has shown that people's perceptions of Rwanda are not necessarily up to date, but I think that the policy will survive this criticism.
Sure. OK, let's talk about what I told you I wanted to talk to you about. You're back from the United States of America. I remember very clearly Obama telling Dave Cameron that if we vote for Brexit, we'll be back of the line as far as trade deals with the United States of America are concerned. You and colleagues have risen above that. But what I find intriguing is that you weren't there exclusively to talk about a free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and the United States of America. You were drilling in state by state to people who specialise in whatever it might be, IT or insurance, what have you, and you were cutting deals with individual states. Tell me about that.
Yes, so we've left the EU. There was a lot of criticism about that. We're still working through some of the issues related to that. But this is a massive opportunity for us, but also countries like the United States who share our vision of capitalism. So I've been spending a lot of time there. We're in round 6 of our negotiations for the federal deal. That's the one that looks at tariffs and removing those big barriers to trade. But actually where most of the regulation sits and most of the opportunity sits is at state level and local level. 93% of the growth in the US is generated by some particular metro areas. So I thought it was sensible for us to concentrate there whilst we're still negotiating the FTA.
It's intriguing. Earlier on, Hamish McRae, the political economist with The Independent and the Mail, was on, and so was Arlene Foster, who said, you know, actually that analysis applies to India as well, and where Boris was recently, that you can cut a deal with Modi, but the reality of how India functions in the modern world is also state by state.
Well, trade deals are a starting point. They're removing barriers to trade. The things that we're doing at state level are going to remove barriers to trade. Ultimately, it's about bringing people together, people, money and ideas to solve problems, to create new business opportunities. That's what we're trying to do. So we've got to put the hard work in. We've got to re-establish those connections. In the US, we are talking to 20 states. Currently, that's going to be a growing number. The first 8 deals we're going to sign represent about 20% of the US economy. This is big stuff. It will reduce costs for business. It will open up new opportunities for UK businesses and make it easier for them to actually provide services and goods to the US. And we're also creating some very interesting partnerships, pairing up particular states or large cities with parts of the UK, which again will forge some really interesting partnerships and opportunities.
What Hamish McRae also said was it's a kind of recognition that globalism itself is redefining itself, and you're playing a part in that, and so is Boris Johnson in India.
Well, when people say to me, what is our role in the world, I say it's to be ourselves. And actually, Ukraine, the situation there, I think, is getting us to remember who we are as a nation and what we have to offer, that convening power for people, money and ideas, to bring those things together. We hate seeing bullies. We want to stand up for freedom, and we're moved and motivated when we see courage in other people. And that's what our country's about. We can do a huge amount, whether it's on trade, on national security or defence, as we are in Ukraine.
Yeah. I'm going to drill down into that very, very slightly, because I know for a fact we know each other a bit, and that Ukraine matters to you personally. You're famously a Royal Navy reservist at a very senior level these days. But you were engaged in helping train up Ukrainians years ago.
Yes. I mean, people often say that we're not prepared or resilient as a nation. We have been training Ukrainian armed forces for years. I was involved in that operation in 2015, actually as Minister for the Armed Forces. And we have been working alongside them, teaching them how to defuse bombs, medical skills, but also how to use the types of equipment that they're using at the moment. But what people don't know is that in addition to that, we've also been training up their civil servants as well. And a lot of the civil defence that you're seeing after terrible bombing, people going in, helping save lives, put the water supplies back up, all of those things, and all of the civil service support that's needed for that. We have been helping train them do that as well.
You also put your hand in your pocket as far as the Ukrainian refugees concerned.
I am one of a lot of MPs who are also opening their homes.
Yeah, I was talking to Robert Buckland about it the other day. He too has done it. Why is it easier for you guys and not for Joe and Joanna Public? There are hundreds of thousands of people out there who want to do the same thing. And one of the most consistent criticisms of Her Majesty's government has been, I want to help, you know. Why can't I get that refugee into my spare room? And
you can say that about a lot of other areas as well. The frustration with politics is that people have answers, they want to contribute and help, and quite often bureaucracy stops them. We're in the same place with visas and those
But maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg was right in Bethany's News. If everybody was back at work, maybe it could be processed better and more efficiently.
I think that might be true for the DVLA. But I have to say, the Department for International Trade, we are top of the league table with civil service.
I did notice that.
But I think you're right. And we have to... This is a new scheme that's been stood up very quickly. What we've got to do is make sure it's continually improving. Visas are starting to come through. I've been involved with getting visas for people a month prior to the war actually started. Things are improving, and we also need to be sharing good practice and ideas. We want to make people, when they're here, feel as comfortable and remove stresses for them. So things like setting up a bank account, those sorts of things. We need to share good ideas and I don't do gotcha, as you well know, and I never have done gotcha with anybody, let alone you. But basically, we could and should and will do better on clearing that backlog of refugees, Ukrainian folk who want to come here. Everything we do should be about continually improving. And I'm always listening to the experiences of my constituents. Through my own process of getting this young lady over from Ukraine and the paperwork that needs to go with that, I'm constantly feeding in to departments, and they're responding to that. So a lot of people have stepped up. I want to thank them for that, and we need to make it as straightforward as possible for them to do that. When you talked about training Ukrainians when you were Minister for the Armed Services, you then went on to be Secretary of State for Defence as well, so you know what you're talking about. I want to underline that. It's suggested in one or two of the papers today that the Ukrainians, even at that stage, pre-Zelensky, were asking for more weaponry, more armament from us, and the papers are suggesting that it went across Theresa May's desk, it went across Dave Cameron's desk, it even went across Boris Johnson's desk and was rejected. Yes, so I think this is a difficult area. Part of the reason at the start of this conflict that more weapons weren't moved in swifter was because people are very concerned about making sure this is done in a phased way. In part, it's about not putting weapons in places that might be taken by Russian forces, but it's also about the message that it sends. So we have been steadily building up what we have been doing, and on that scale from medical equipment and training and supplies right through to what you're seeing now, which is heavy armour and weapons. There's been a gradual build-up over quite a long period of time.
And another element of that caution, and in my humble opinion, wisely so, is not to allow Putin to say, OK, NATO's now crossed the line. You have got Ukrainian soldiers trained by Penny Mordaunt 5-6 years ago, firing anti-tank missiles designed and built in the United Kingdom, given to Ukrainian forces by us. Washington said no aircraft going across there. Our tanks are going to Poland, so Poland can give tanks to Ukraine. That is crossing a line. If I was a Putin advisor, I'd say put the boot in.
The bottom line is Putin has to fail. Putin cannot hold on to any square inch of territory that he has gone into, and he cannot consolidate territory that was in dispute before this particular war started. He has to fail. NATO and our partners have to ensure that happens. The red lines that NATO has put in place, and not just put in place, but said that they've put in place, I think are to send some very clear messages back to Moscow. And I don't think they would have done that. You don't remove the prospect of armed forces. You don't take that off the table unless there's a very good reason for doing so. So I know this looks a bit peculiar, and people get very frustrated because they want us to go and sort these Russians out. They want Putin to fail. But this is being done in a very cautious and phased way for very good reasons.
Sure.
I think Ben Wallace has done a tremendous job.
I mean, cautious not least because they will have seen on all television outlets, ours included, the Kremlin test firing what's called the Satan II intercontinental ballistic missile, not a strategic battlefield European one, but one that can take out the United Kingdom and take out swathes of the United States of America. Putin told Washington he was going to have that test flight, unlike North Korea. We now read in the papers this morning that the Kremlin's let it be known that it will be ready to go and armed by the autumn. I mean, I'm of an age that finds this loose talk of nuclear weaponry, including from Biden, terrifying.
You're going to see those threats. You're also going to see appalling atrocities committed against civilians. Putin is going to do everything he can to try and drive people to the negotiating table to make any gains that he can. What I would say to people, because I know it is frightening when you hear people talking about these kinds of weapons, is these have been in existence for some time. The threats that you're hearing about from him today are exactly the same threats that we have lived with for decades. We've been living with nuclear weapons for 50 years or more.
I used to have V-bombers at the bottom of my garden.
So our deterrent and our policy towards those kind of weapons has stood us in very good stead. It has been effective, and that remains the case. So this is frightening because you're hearing about it more, but what we have in place to deter that is very effective and will remain so.
You mentioned earlier on about the approach to Ukraine and that there's clearly a defence and a diplomatic dimension to it. I thought one of the really interesting contributions, and it dovetails into what you've just been up to in the States and what Boris Johnson's been up to in India, and that was Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, talking about the need for a Marshall Plan for Ukraine once this ghastliness is over. Hopefully, in victory for Ukraine, defence of Ukraine and what have you. There's no clearer statement from a leading figure in the government that you proudly serve as well, of saying Britain's a bigger player now than when we all started. We can lead a Marshall Plan not only to defend Ukraine, but to rebuild it in the peace. That used to be America's job.
Well, I think the situation in Ukraine has reinvigorated the relationship we have with the United States. We have been a key player. I think people have looked at us and seen the leadership in Europe that we have shown. and the partnership we have with the US in terms of our place in NATO. And through our actions, which we have always been solid in, our 2% commitment and our commitment to that defensive alliance, other nations are now realising that what we've been doing has been right and are starting to step up and do more. So I think that has been a very positive thing, not something Putin necessarily would have wanted. But we estimate right now there's about £60 billion worth of damage done to cities across Ukraine. We want to ensure that they can be rebuilt as soon as possible. We will be a key player in doing that, and I think will be a convener for other nations contributing to that as well. Russia should be footing the bill for some of this, in my opinion, and we'll be looking at ways to do that. In the meantime, we need to ensure that we can keep, in parts of Ukraine that aren't in the direct line of fire, we can keep businesses and people going as normal. I'm hoping that my department will be able to announce some new things this coming week to enable people to keep trading who have businesses in Ukraine, and that should make it a lot easier for them.
It seems to me, whether we're talking about specifics of trade deals that you are cutting in the United States of America and the deal that the Prime Minister hopes to have sorted by December with India, and that last minute of conversation, that you're a part of a generation that is redefining our role in the world, our relationship with partners and neighbours, our economic strength, getting on with the people's priorities, helping them not worry so much about the cost of living and crisis and what have you. Is it time for the current Prime Minister to say to that generation, people like yourself, like Liz, like Tom Tugendhat, OK, it's your turn?
No, we're talking about a Prime Minister that has been elected with a sizable majority and a very clear mandate. We're also dealing with a lot of issues, not just Ukraine, but the sorts of things that I've been setting out. And I think that we want some stability in order to be able to do that. You'll have heard the Prime Minister's frustration about not being able to get on with that. This is ultimately about trust, and governments can't do anything and prime ministers can't do anything without trust. And we are either going to be able to restore that trust or not. That is the bottom line. There's lots of twists and turns on a daily basis, but that is what it comes down to. I'm one of the Prime Minister's ministers. He's getting on with his job, and my job is to support him to do that.
But trade and economic well-being and the cost of living crisis are now front and centre in that fight back by your government, which you'd be the first to admit is up against it at the moment, including the Prime Minister.
We are not being distracted from this. I just zoomed back from Texas, where I'm doing this. You've mentioned India, which he's been doing this week. This coming week, I'm doing deals in Africa, all sorts of work to progress our accession to the CPTPP, which is going to be massive, not just in terms of growth, but to create jobs with higher wages. All of this has been going on. It's much more boring and dry than some of the spicy things that appear in the papers. But we are getting on with the job. Sure. The Prime Minister wants to do that.
Penny, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I can tell you, everyone listening will not think it's remotely boring if it means they can still get the virgin olive oil that they want from Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And get a chance to have, like you, a Ukrainian refugee in their spare room. Always a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for so much of your time and a very thoughtful conversation.
Good to
Great to see you. Thank you.